Have you ever seen something so unusual, yet so beautiful, that it stayed in your mind all day? Every morning, this tiny girl walks 5 huge German shepherds through town, calm, silent, and alone. But when the townspeople finally learned why, their hearts were never the same again. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? Every morning, at exactly 7, the mist over Maple Hollow Street would part just enough for folks to see her, a tiny girl in a pink coat, leading 5 German shepherds like a little queen of silence. The fog clung low between the maple trees, softening the outlines of porches and mailboxes, while the smell of wet leaves and roasted coffee drifted from the Blue Ridge Diner. Inside, silver spoons clinked against ceramic cups, and the same voices filled the morning air the way church bells filled Sundays. Michael Garrison sat in his usual corner booth, nursing black coffee that had long gone cold. He was 40, give or take, though his eyes looked older, worn down by stories he'd written and regrets he'd stopped telling. He came to the diner each dawn not because he liked the food, but because it gave him something to watch people starting their day, the town waking up, the steady rhythm of normal life he no longer felt part of. The bell over the door chimed as Mrs. Beatrice Lowe swept in, carrying a tray of cinnamon rolls. "You seen her again this morning, Mike?" she asked, setting the tray behind the counter. He didn't look up from his cup. Every day, right on schedule. Mrs. Lowe wiped her hands on her apron and leaned toward the window. Outside, the girl appeared from the mist, her small figure dwarfed by the size of the dogs at her side. "Mercy, would you look at that? Maybe she's training a police army," she joked. The regulars laughed, but Michael didn't. He watched the girl turn the corner, pink coat flashing through the fog like a heartbeat. He scribbled in his pocket notebook, 5 dogs, 6 years old, no adult, no fear. When he finally stepped outside, the morning air bit through his jacket. The street was quiet except for the steady rhythm of paws on pavement fading into the distance. The girl's stride was calm, unhurried, the dogs moving with a discipline that made no sense for their age or hers. Somewhere behind her, the church bell struck 7, the sound rolling over the rooftops like distant thunder. That evening, the fog returned thicker than ever. Michael sat on his porch with a half-finished bottle of bourbon, watching lamplight flicker through the haze. Across the street, an old man locked up his hardware store, and a cat darted under a pickup truck. It was the same small-town routine, predictable as clockwork, except for that girl. There was something about her that didn't fit, like a chapter missing from a book everyone else thought they'd finished reading. He told himself not to care. Asheville was full of mysteries, stray kids, lost pets, neighbors who never waved back. But this one stuck. Maybe it was the way she never smiled, or how the dogs moved in perfect step, eyes scanning every doorway. It stirred something he hadn't felt in years, a curiosity edged with guilt, the same feeling that used to pull him toward stories he couldn't ignore. The next morning arrived painted in gold and gray. Dew beaded on every porch rail, and the Blue Ridge Mountains rested in a haze that looked almost holy. Michael woke early without knowing why. Maybe habit, maybe something that tugged at him in his sleep. He poured burnt coffee into a travel mug, slipped on his worn coat, and stepped outside before the streetlights had gone dark. The air carried the quiet hum of a town not yet awake, the rumble of a distant truck, the creak of a screen door, the whistle of the first morning train. Then, through the fog, she appeared again. Same pink coat, same 5 shepherds, same rhythm of tiny footsteps and padded paws. For a moment he thought the scene was replaying itself, like a looped memory sent to remind him that some things return until you learn their meaning. He leaned against a lamppost and watched. The girl moved with purpose, her head slightly tilted as though listening to something only she could hear. One of the dogs, the largest, brushed its shoulder against her knee in silent communication. The leash lines shimmered in the pale light, taut but gentle, connecting her to the creatures like threads of trust. From the diner doorway, Mrs. Lowe peeked out, coffee pot in hand. "Still gives me chills," she whispered. "No adult, no leash, tangles just that steady walk." Michael nodded but said nothing. His reporter's mind cataloged details: the scuffed shoes, the way the dog's ears pivoted at each sound, the faint mark of dirt on her sleeve. None of it explained how she kept control or where she was going. She passed the bakery, the church, the old barber's pole that hadn't spun in years. Every time someone called out, "Morning, sweetheart," the girl never answered. The dogs would slow, forming a quiet wall between her and whoever spoke. Then, at her soft whistle, they'd move on in perfect step. Michael followed at a distance until she turned the final corner by the elm tree. That was where she always vanished. Beyond it lay the outskirts of town, a strip of old houses, half hidden by vines and years. When he reached the bend, she was gone. No footsteps, no bark, nothing but mist curling along the pavement. He waited, listening to the hush settle over the street. For a long while, all he heard was his own breathing and the faint ticking of his wristwatch. It felt like the world had paused, holding its breath with him. Then the church bell struck 7 again, echoing through the valley. The sound broke whatever spell had been cast. Back at the diner, conversation swelled around him. Someone joked the girl might be a ghost. Another said she was part of a secret training program. Michael let them talk. He opened his notebook and wrote a single line beneath his earlier notes. "She's not afraid of anything." That night, he couldn't shake the image of her small hands gripping the leashes, of those dogs moving like soldiers through the fog. The memory threaded through the quiet of his house, through the sound of the clock and the drip of the kitchen tap. He sat by the window, smoke curling from his forgotten cigarette, and felt a strange ache he couldn't name. It wasn't pity. It was recognition, the kind a lonely man feels when he sees courage in someone smaller, younger, braver than himself. He closed his notebook, stared into the thickening mist outside, and whispered the question that would not leave him. Where does she go when the mist fades? By Thursday morning, the fog over Asheville felt heavier, like the town itself had secrets it didn't want to share. Michael Garrison sat in his car near Maple Hollow Street, camera resting on the passenger seat, a notebook on his lap. He told himself he was just curious. Old habits, he said. Once a journalist, always a journalist. But deep down, it wasn't the story that drew him, it was the little girl who walked like she carried the world on her shoulders. He sipped the bitter coffee he'd brewed at home, watching the clock crawl towards 7. The streets were nearly empty, save for the hum of a milk truck and the flicker of porch lights fighting the dawn. Then, like the chime of an old memory, came the soft rhythm of footsteps and pause. She appeared right on cue, Hannah Monroe, though we didn't know her name yet. The pink coat, the braids tied with blue ribbons, and those 5 shepherds moving beside her, as if they shared a single heartbeat. Each leash was loose. Her tiny hand barely curled around them, but somehow they obeyed every invisible command. Michael slid from the car, pretending to check his phone while he followed from a safe distance. The girl turned onto Willow Lane, then past the church steps, where 2 women sweeping the porch froze to stare. "Lord have mercy," one whispered. "She's so little." The girl didn't look back. Her dogs formed a diamond pattern around her, one leading, one trailing, 2 flanking her sides, and one walking so close he brushed her coat. It wasn't random. It was formation. Michael stopped beside the bakery, watching her reflection glide across the shop window. Every few steps, one dog turned its head, scanning alleys and driveways like a guard on patrol. When a delivery truck roared by too close, all 5 tightened their circle until the danger passed. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He raised his camera, hesitated, then pressed the shutter once. The sound was soft, but one of the dogs turned sharply toward him. Its eyes met his through the fog, steady, intelligent, unblinking. The girl spoke a single word, low and calm, "Easy." Instantly, the dog's muscles loosened. Michael felt a chill crawl down his spine. That wasn't a random command. It was the voice of authority, of training. He whispered under his breath, "That's not a game." She crossed the park where the grass glistened with dew. A lone jogger slowed as he passed, grinning nervously. "You're a brave little lady," he called. The biggest dog stepped between them, blocking the path until she'd moved ahead. The jogger chuckled but didn't try again. Michael jotted in his notebook. Tactical spacing, discipline, no hesitation. His hands trembled slightly, though he wasn't sure why. He'd covered war zones, crime scenes, protests, yet this small parade of innocence and control unsettled him more than any of them. Maybe because it felt like watching a memory from a world that no longer existed, where loyalty meant everything. At the corner, the girl paused. She looked toward the hill where the fog gathered thick as smoke. The lead dog barked once, a sound more like a coded signal than a bark. Then they turned together down the narrow road that led out of town. Michael followed until the pavement cracked into gravel, and the houses grew old and tired. Rusted mailboxes leaned against fences. Windows were patched with plastic. A crow cawed somewhere above. The road smelled of pine sap and wet soil, a scent that belonged to the edges of things, the places people forget. And there she was again, moving straight into that forgotten space like she belonged to it. The farther they went, the quieter the world became. The morning chatter of birds faded into a deep stillness that only existed beyond the last mailbox. Hannah's boots made tiny impressions in the damp gravel, each one quickly softened by the mist. The 5 shepherds glided beside her, bodies tensed but calm, their breath visible in the cold air. Michael kept his distance, steps light, camera hanging at his side. Every instinct told him not to spook them, yet curiosity pushed him forward. The road curved between 2 rows of old oaks, their branches dripping with dew. Somewhere beyond the trees, a dog barked a deep, commanding bark, and Hannah's team responded instantly, forming a protective arc around her. The precision of it made Michael's heart thud. He crouched behind a fence post and raised his camera again. Through the lens, he saw her mouth move a whisper, maybe a name. The dogs relaxed as though her voice had flipped a hidden switch. She kept walking, and they followed, without breaking formation. The fog thinned enough for him to glimpse the faint outline of a gate ahead, rusted metal, half open, framed by wild ivy. Beyond it, the land dipped into a stretch of forgotten houses, roofs sagging like old shoulders. Hannah slowed, brushed her hand across the gate as if greeting an old friend, then stepped through. The dogs' tails wagged once, softly, before they disappeared with her. Michael froze. Every instinct screamed to stop. Trespassing in this town wasn't exactly a hobby you bragged about, but the journalist in him, the part that once chased truth through riots and ruin, wouldn't let go. He followed, breath shallow. Inside the gate, the air smelled of mud, wet fur, and something faintly metallic. A low structure crouched at the end of a weedy yard peeling paint. Windows covered in plastic, the kind of house time forgot. Hannah crossed the yard with certainty, unbothered by the broken steps or puddles. When she reached the porch, one of the dogs pawed at the door, whining. She whispered again, and the sound that answered from inside wasn't human. It was another bark, weak but eager. More dogs. Michael swallowed hard. His pulse quickened as he adjusted the focus on his camera. Through the cracked window pane, he saw movement, a flash of fur, then a lamp flickering to life. The girl vanished inside. He waited, counting his breaths. 1 minute, 2. The fog wrapped around him like a blanket, muffling every sound but the occasional drip from the eaves. He should have left. He knew it. But instead he moved closer, circling the side of the house. Around back, an old shed leaned against a tree, its door hanging by one hinge. He peeked inside. Empty food bags lay in a heap beside a stack of water bowls. Torn blankets formed a rough bed. On the floor, a metal tag glimmered in the weak light, scratched, but readable. K9 Unit, Asheville Police. Michael's stomach tightened. He traced the letters with his thumb, the metal cold as stone. These weren't pets. They were trained service dogs, retired maybe, but still disciplined, still bound by commands. But why were they here? And why with her? A deep growl rolled through the air. He turned. One of the shepherds stood at the corner of the shed. Eyes locked on him. It didn't lunge. It didn't bark. It just stood there, watching. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, from the porch, a small voice called out, "Ranger!" The dog's ears flicked. It gave a low whine and trotted back toward the house. Michael let out the breath he'd been holding. His hands trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the eerie sense that he'd just stepped into a story far older than he'd guessed. He took one cautious step backward, then another. The fog thickened again, swallowing the yard. He could just make out Hannah's silhouette through the screen door, small, calm, utterly unafraid. She looked in his direction, though he doubted she could see him. Then her voice floated through the mist, soft as a lullaby. "It's okay, Ranger. Dad would have liked him." Michael froze. The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Dad. She had a father, or once had one, and somehow he mattered to all this. He lowered the camera slowly, heart pounding. As he turned back toward the road, the first rays of sunlight began breaking through the fog, slicing it into golden ribbons. He whispered the thought that had been building all morning, half awe, half disbelief. "Who the hell taught you that, kid?" By the time Friday rolled around, the fog lifted late, and heavy rain had followed through the night. Maple Hollow Street shimmered with puddles, and the mountains wore a crown of pale cloud. Michael Garrison hadn't slept much. The images kept replaying in his mind. The girl, the house, the metal tag, stamped K9 unit. It was too strange, too deliberate to be a coincidence. He sat in the diner again, fingers wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. Mrs. Lowe filled it anyway, her eyes curious. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Mike." He managed a faint smile. "Maybe I have." From the booth window, he could see the same corner where the girl always appeared. Not today. The street was empty, slick and shining under the weak morning light. Something about that absence gnawed at him. He stood, dropped $1 on the counter for the refill, and headed out. The air smelled of wet asphalt and maple bark. He drove slowly, tracing the route she always took. Past the church, the bakery, the park. The dogs were nowhere in sight. Neither was the girl. When he reached the outskirts of town, the part where houses leaned tiredly into the hills, he slowed. The gate came into view, rusted and dripping from the storm. He pulled over to the shoulder and stepped out. His boots sank into the soft earth. Every instinct said to leave it alone, but curiosity outweighed caution. The old Monroe house looked even smaller in daylight, swallowed by vines and years of neglect. The roof sagged on one side, a wind chime hung by a single thread, clinking faintly in the breeze. Through the cracked windows, he saw movement, quick flashes of fur, tails wagging, a small shape passing between rooms. He knocked once, gently. A few seconds later, a muffled bark answered, then silence. "Hannah?" he said, testing the name he'd picked up from a faded mailbox near the gate. "It's okay. I'm not here to bother you. Just wanted to make sure you're all right." No response. But after a moment, the door creaked open, just enough for one brown eye to peek through the gap. "You shouldn't be here," the girl said. Her voice was steady, polite, far too grown for her age. "I just wanted to check," Michael replied softly. "It's cold out. You got enough to eat?" The girl didn't answer. One of the shepherds nudged the door wider, standing between them. Its fur was thick, darker than the others. The tag on its collar read Ranger. Michael crouched a little, lowering his tone. "You must be Ranger. I met you yesterday." The dog tilted its head, studying him. Hannah's gaze flicked to the notebook sticking out of his coat pocket. "You're a reporter?" "Used to be," he said. "Now I mostly write about people who do good things." She frowned, uncertain if that was supposed to reassure her. "People don't come here." "I noticed," Michael said. "But sometimes they should." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "You can come in, but don't touch anything." The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of soap, fur, and damp wood. The living room was tidy in a way that felt practiced, blankets folded, bowls lined up neatly, a fire just beginning to catch in the old brick hearth. The dogs lay scattered across the floor, each in its place, their eyes following Michael with quiet suspicion. On the wall hung a framed photograph, a man in uniform kneeling beside a German shepherd, sunlight glinting off his badge. Michael recognized the same face from a newspaper years ago. Officer Benjamin Monroe, a local police handler killed in the line of duty. He felt the weight of the moment settle around him. "That's your dad, isn't it?" The girl nodded, one hand resting on Ranger's head. "He was the best. These were his partners. They're all I have left." Michael stood still for a long time, the photograph burning quietly in his mind. The young officer's eyes were calm, confident, someone who believed the world could be kept safe if you just tried hard enough. He'd written stories about men like that once, before the world had worn that kind of hope out of him. "How long have you been here alone?" he asked finally. Hannah's shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "Since the summer. Mrs. Lowe brings food sometimes. I do chores for her. The dogs, they help." "Em?" He scanned the room again, stacked firewood, clean dishes, water bowls, even a little chore list written in a child's careful handwriting. "Feed them, brush Ranger. Light the fire if it rains." Every line was practical, precise. Michael cleared his throat. "Does anyone from the police department know you're living here?" "They knew," she said softly. "At first. But then they said it wasn't allowed. They said the house was condemned. So you stayed anyway?" She nodded, her chin lifting with a kind of stubborn pride. "Dad said we never leave a post until the job's done." The words hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't disobeying out of defiance. She was following orders from a man who would never give another. He looked at Ranger, lying near the fireplace. The dog's eyes never left Hannah. "And the job?" Michael asked quietly. "Keep them safe," she said. They were his team. After he didn't come home, they stopped eating, stopped listening to anyone. They just waited by the gate. So I came back. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, whispering through broken shingles. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled low and tired. Michael exhaled slowly. "That's a big promise for someone your size." Hannah gave a faint smile. "Dad said promises don't measure by size." For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound came from the crackling fire and the rhythmic thump of tails against the floorboards. Michael felt a knot in his chest he hadn't realized was still there, something between admiration and sorrow. He wanted to say the right thing, something that might make her trust him. But the truth was, he didn't trust himself. He'd once walked away from a story about a family just like this, too complicated, too sad, and it had haunted him ever since. Finally, he said, "I think your father would be proud." Hannah turned toward the window where rain streaked down the glass. "He used to say heroes never leave. They just find new ways to watch over us." Michael followed her gaze. Beyond the yard, the fog was returning, curling low along the fence line. The world outside looked softer again, almost unreal. "You really believe that?" he asked. "I don't have to," she replied. "They do." He looked at the dog's 5 pairs of eyes fixed on her, steady and faithful, waiting for the next command. Something in him cracked a little at that quiet faith. When he finally stepped back onto the porch, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of storm. He paused, glancing once more through the open doorway. Hannah knelt by the hearth, feeding small sticks into the fire. The dogs gathered close around her. He felt the urge to ask 1,000 questions, but one kept pressing harder than the rest. "Why didn't anyone come for you?" The girl looked up, the flicker of the fire dancing in her eyes. "Because," she said softly, "they thought we were gone too." Michael's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The door creaked shut between them, leaving him alone on the porch, the sound of the fire fading behind the wood. As he walked back down the muddy road, the fog swallowed his figure once again, and the echo of her voice followed him like a whisper carried on the wind. He didn't know it yet, but from that moment on, neither of them would be invisible again. And somewhere deep inside, the story he thought he'd stopped telling began to stir once more. By Sunday, the talk had started. In small towns like Asheville, silence travels faster than sound. A secret rarely lasts past the second cup of coffee. Word spread from the bakery to the barber shop that Michael Garrison had been seen out by the old Monroe place, the condemned house at the edge of town. By noon, every table at Blue Ridge Diner was humming with half-truths and questions. Mrs. Lowe tried to hush them. "She's just a little girl," she said. "Leave her be." But gossip, once stirred, has its own hunger. Someone claimed the girl was a runaway. Another swore she'd stolen the police dogs. The story changed with each retelling, growing teeth and claws until even the kindest hearts began to doubt. Michael heard it all from his corner booth. He'd promised himself he wouldn't get involved, but that promise had already gone the way of his empty coffee cup. When Chief Reynolds walked through the diner door, brushing rain off his shoulders, every head turned. "Morning, Chief," Mrs. Lowe greeted, forcing cheer into her voice. "Morning, Bee." He nodded toward Michael. "Mind if I sit?" Michael gestured to the seat across from him. "You've heard it too, I guess." "Hard not to." Reynolds folded his hands, eyes steady. "Girl out there alone with 5 9 seconds. House that's supposed to be boarded up. Folks are nervous. Liability and all." "She's not dangerous," Michael said. "She's disciplined. Those dogs would take a bullet before they hurt anyone." "That's not the point." The chief's voice softened. "She's a child. No guardian, no legal claim to those animals. We can't ignore it." Outside, thunder muttered in the distance, the sky turning the color of old pewter. Michael stared through the window at the line of maples trembling in the wind. "She lost her father," he said quietly. She's holding on to what's left. Reynolds sighed. I get that, but the state doesn't run on sympathy. Animal control's already sniffing around. They'll file a report by week's end. Michael felt the words settle like stones in his gut. He'd seen bureaucracies devour stories like this before, turning love into paperwork, survival into trespass. He wanted to shout that rules weren't built for children who still talk to ghosts. When the chief left, Mrs. Lowe approached with a fresh pot of coffee. You can't fix everything, Mike, she said softly. He gave a tired smile. Maybe not, but somebody should try. That evening, he drove back toward the hills. The gate creaked open just enough for him to slip through. Hannah was on the porch, brushing Ranger's coat under the dim porch light. The other dogs dozed nearby, noses twitching at the scent of oncoming rain. You shouldn't keep coming, she said without looking up. They'll find out. They already have, Michael replied. Animal control's asking questions. Hannah's brush slowed. They can't take them. They're all I have. He sat on the step below her. You're not alone, kid. But you need help before things get messy. She shook her head. No one helps without taking something away. The words hit him like cold water. He remembered interviews from another lifetime, children caught between systems, each clinging to whatever scrap of love survived the wreck. Hannah's eyes carried that same guarded light. Lightning flickered across the valley, followed by the long roll of thunder. Ranger pressed closer to her, sensing the change in the air. Michael glanced at the horizon, where storm clouds gathered like a verdict. By midnight, the storm had arrived in full force. Rain hammered the tin roof like 1,000 whispered warnings. The dogs stirred restlessly, pacing near the door. Each rumble of thunder sent a low growl rippling through the pack. Michael sat by the window, watching lightning carve white lines through the dark. He'd stayed after the storm broke, unable to leave. Something in his chest told him that tonight would change everything. Hannah fed the fire, her small frame illuminated by its flicker. They get scared when it storms, she said, not looking up. Dad used to tell them thunder was just heaven moving furniture. Michael smiled faintly. That sounds like something a good man would say. For a moment, the house felt safe, a fragile peace built from warmth and memory. But the peace didn't last. Through the steady roar of the rain came another sound, the low, unmistakable hum of a vehicle stopping outside. Hannah froze. They're here, she whispered. Michael's pulse jumped. He peeked through the curtain. A white van with city animal control painted across the side sat idling under the elm tree. Two figures stepped out, rain slickers glinting in the light. Stay inside, he murmured, already moving to the porch. Don't let them take them, she pleaded, voice trembling. Please. He turned back, meeting her eyes. I'll try. The officers advanced cautiously, flashlights slicing through the rain. Sir, the taller one called out. We received reports of unregistered animals and a minor living on condemned property. We need to check inside. Michael raised his hands in the downpour. She's fine. The dogs are fine. They're trained, disciplined police, canine seconds, retired. The girl's keeping them alive. Sir, please step aside. Behind him, a bark shattered the night. 5 shadows filled the doorway, muscles tense, eyes blazing gold in the lightning. The officers halted. Easy, Michael warned, palms open. They're protecting her, that's all. But then a branch cracked nearby, sharp as a gunshot. The dogs erupted, not attacking, but forming a wall, barking furiously as the storm raged around them. One officer stumbled back, reaching for his tranquilizer. Don't, Michael shouted. They'll only react worse. Hannah appeared behind the dogs, her pink coat glistening with rain. Her small voice cut through the chaos. Stop! Instantly, the shepherds went silent, their breathing heavy in the storm's roar. She stepped forward, rain plastering her hair to her cheeks, eyes fierce despite her fear. They're all I have left, she said, trembling. You can't take them. The younger officer hesitated, lowering his weapon. The older one sighed. We'll be back in the morning with child services. The van's lights faded into the mist, leaving only the sound of rain and 5 dogs panting beside their girl. Michael turned to her, soaked and speechless. Hannah knelt, resting a hand on Ranger's head, whispering, Don't worry, boys. I won't let them take you. Outside, thunder cracked again, echoing like a warning across the valley. Michael knew it then. Tomorrow, when they returned, everything would come apart. And for the first time in years, he realized he wasn't just watching a story unfold. He was part of it now. The storm didn't end with dawn. It lingered like a wounded thing, moaning through the trees and flooding the narrow road to the old Monroe house. By sunrise, the sky hung low and gray, swollen with rain that refused to stop. Michael hadn't slept. He'd stayed on the couch, half listening to the roof drip and the dogs shift in uneasy dreams. Every flash of lightning threw quick silhouettes on the wall, 5 watchful figures around a small, sleeping girl curled beside the hearth. At 6, Ranger stirred first. He padded to the window, ears twitching. The others followed, silent and alert. Michael joined them, peering through the fog. The gate was open. The wind? No, he could see tire marks, fresh in the mud. He stepped outside, rain slapping against his coat. The road was empty, but something felt wrong, too quiet, too expectant. When he returned inside, Hannah was awake, rubbing her eyes. "They'll come today," she said simply. No fear in her voice. Just the dull certainty of someone who's learned not to hope for miracles. Michael crouched beside her. "Then we'll be ready. I won't let them take you by surprise." Hannah nodded, small and serious. She fed the fire and lined up the food bowls, moving with the rhythm of routine. The dogs followed every gesture, tails low, waiting for her cue. Around 9, the wind picked up again, howling through the trees. A shutter banged somewhere in the back. The smell of wet earth filled the room. Michael began stacking blankets near the door in case the storm worsened. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. Hannah paused. "Sometimes. But Dad always said you don't run from storms. You wait until they pass." He gave a tired smile. "Your father sounded like a good man." "The best," she whispered. A crack of thunder split the air, closer this time. The dogs tensed, barking toward the back of the house. Michael grabbed a flashlight and motioned for Hannah to stay put. The back door was rattling in the wind, its lock barely holding. He reached to secure it when he saw movement through the rain, a shadow darting toward the shed. His pulse jumped. He stepped outside, boots sinking into mud, flashlight beam cutting through the curtain of water. The shed door hung half open, banging against the wall. Inside, the floor glistened with puddles. Empty food bags lay torn beside a stack of crates. Then he saw a wooden box marked K9 Unit, property of Metro Police. His breath caught. The same faded lettering he'd seen years ago while covering the city's K9 division. He brushed off the dust and pried the lid open. Inside were old collars, service tags, and a framed commendation. Officer Benjamin Monroe. Distinguished Service Medal for bravery and loyalty. Beneath it, a small journal bound in worn leather. Michael flipped through its damp pages, notes about training schedules, medication logs, field missions, and at the end, one final entry scrawled in darker ink. "If anything happens to me, Hannah knows what to do. She's got more courage than anyone I've ever met." A shiver crawled up his spine. He closed the journal carefully and looked back toward the house, where faint light from the fireplace glowed through the mist. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of sirens far down the road. He knew that sound, and it wasn't thunder. The sirens grew louder, weaving through the sound of rain until they became a single rising note that set every dog on alert. Hannah ran to the window. "They're coming back," she whispered. Michael tucked the journal into his coat pocket. "Then we'll meet them at the door." Outside, the storm raged with a wild rhythm, bending trees and scattering leaves across the yard. The white van stopped at the gate, followed by a police cruiser this time. 2 animal control officers stepped out, joined by Chief Reynolds himself. Rain streamed off their coats in silver lines. Michael opened the door before they could knock. "You don't need to break in," he said calmly. "She's safe. Let's do this right." The chief removed his hat, water dripping from the brim. His eyes softened when he saw the child standing beside the fire, surrounded by her dogs, like a small general guarding her troops. "Hannah," he said gently, "we're not here to hurt anyone, but we have to make sure you're cared for." "I'm fine," she answered, her voice steady but fragile. "They take care of me." The older officer sighed. "Sweetheart, this isn't a home. It's falling apart." Michael stepped forward. "You don't understand. She's been caring for retired canine seconds. They were her father's team. She's continuing his work." The chief turned to him sharply. "Her father Benjamin Monroe?" Michael nodded, pulling the damp journal from his coat. I found this in the shed. Uh, Reynolds took the book carefully, opening to the final entry. His expression changed, grief flickering beneath the hard lines of duty. Ben was one of ours. I was his partner before the accident. He closed the journal and looked at Hannah, voice trembling. He died a hero. We thought his daughter went to live with relatives. Hannah shook her head. They didn't want me. They said I reminded them too much of him. For a moment, the house fell silent, except for the storm. The chief knelt beside her. Your dad. He'd be proud of what you've done here. But you can't do it alone anymore. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. If I go, they'll take the dogs in. No, Michael said quietly. They won't. I'll make sure of it. Reynolds looked at him. You offering to take responsibility? I am, Michael replied. At least until we figure something better out. These dogs belong with someone who understands them, and she belongs with them. The chief studied him for a long moment before nodding. All right, but this place needs to be cleared for safety. You can stay with her until we sort it out. Relief rippled through the room like the sudden quiet after lightning. The dogs relaxed, tails thumping softly against the floorboards. Hannah wiped her face and looked at Michael. You mean it? You won't let them take us? He smiled. You've got my word, kid. I don't break promises. Outside, the thunder began to fade, leaving only the soft patter of rain. The officers left quietly, their lights disappearing down the muddy road. Michael closed the door and leaned against it, the exhaustion finally catching up to him. The fire crackled, throwing golden light across the faded photo of Officer Benjamin Monroe. Hannah placed her small hand over the frame. He used to say storms don't scare brave hearts, she murmured. Michael looked at her, something tightening in his throat. He was right. But even brave hearts need someone beside them. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. Maybe that's why you came. The words settled between them like the first calm after chaos. Later that night, after the rain stopped, Michael stepped outside to breathe. The air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. From inside, he could hear Hannah humming softly to the dogs as they drifted to sleep. He looked up at the broken clouds. Somewhere above them, he liked to think Benjamin Monroe was watching, grateful that his promise had been kept by someone else. The wind stirred again, gentle now, rustling the maples at the edge of the property. Michael whispered into the quiet. You can rest now, officer. She's safe. Behind him, a faint bark echoed through the night, as if in answer. But far down the road, the faint glimmer of headlights appeared once more, slow, cautious, unmarked. And Michael knew, with a sinking certainty, that this story wasn't over yet. By Monday morning, the storm had finally passed. The mountains gleamed under a soft veil of mist, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. The old Monroe house stood battered but unbroken, a patchwork of memory and resilience clinging to its frame. Michael arrived early, carrying a box of groceries and tools. Mrs. Lowe had filled the bag with canned soup, bread, and something she called hope in a jar, her homemade peach preserves. You can't fix the world on an empty stomach, she told him. When he pulled up, Hannah was already outside, sweeping the porch with a broom taller than she was. The dogs lounged in the patchy sunlight, their coats drying in the new warmth. She looked up, eyes bright but tired. You came back, she said simply. Told you I would, Michael replied. Got some supplies. Thought we'd patch things up a bit before the inspectors come sniffing around. She gave a small nod. They said we have to move soon. Maybe not, he said, setting down the box. If we can make this place safe, they might let you stay for now. He didn't add what he was really thinking, that he couldn't bear the idea of her being taken away, folded into the gray machinery of foster homes and paperwork. This place, with its creaking floors and loyal dogs, was the only world she had left. They worked quietly through the morning. Michael fixed the porch railing while Hannah repaired torn blankets near the fireplace. Every so often, one of the dogs would wander over and drop a chewed stick at his feet, as if offering a trade. You ever think about what you'll be when you grow up? He asked, hammer tapping gently. She thought for a moment. A trainer, maybe. Like Dad. He said dogs understand truth better than people. Michael smiled. He sounds like a man who learned that the hard way. The girl looked up, a faint sadness crossing her face. He did. Oh. The noon sun broke through the clouds, scattering silver light across the yard. For the first time in days, Michael felt something close to peace. He brewed coffee on the old stove, the scent curling through the kitchen like a promise. As they ate sandwiches and shared Mrs. Lowe's preserves, Hannah pointed toward a closed door at the end of the hallway. "That was his office," she said softly. "I don't go in there much." "Why not?" "It feels like he's still working." Michael followed her gaze. The doorknob was dull with age, the wood warped by years of weather. Something about it drew him a quiet hum of unfinished stories. "Maybe we should take a look," he suggested gently. Hannah hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but we go together." The air inside was cool and still, heavy with the faint scent of leather and old paper. Dust motes danced in the beam of sunlight spilling through the cracked blinds. A uniform hung neatly on the back of a chair, badge polished to a soft gleam. On the desk sat a metal lockbox, its keyhole rusted but intact. Hannah traced her finger along the nameplate on the desk. "Officer Benjamin Monroe, K-9 Division." She swallowed hard. "He used to write here every night. Said one day I'd understand everything he'd done." Michael knelt beside the desk. Maybe this is what he meant. He tried the lock gently. It didn't budge. "Got a paperclip?" he asked. Hannah grinned despite herself. "You sound like Dad." Within minutes, the lock clicked open. Inside the box were several files, a small flash drive, and a folded letter sealed in wax. The paper had yellowed with time, but the handwriting was unmistakably firm. "To whoever finds this, and to my daughter, if she's old enough to understand." Hannah's breath caught. "That's his writing." Michael met her eyes. "Then maybe it's time we finally read what he wanted to say." M. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he broke the wax seal. The letter unfolded with the fragile sound of old paper yielding to air again after too long. The ink had faded, but each line was deliberate, strong, written by a man who knew time was running out. He cleared his throat softly and began to read aloud, his voice low and steady. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't come back from the field. Don't let that scare you, sweetheart. Some people spend their whole lives looking for a purpose. I was lucky enough to find mine, and so will you." Hannah stood beside him, eyes wide, one hand resting on Ranger's head. "The dogs, Bravo, Scout, Ranger, Duke, and Faith. They're more than partners. They're family. I trained them to protect, not to hurt. When the world feels too big, they'll show you courage. When you feel alone, they'll remind you that loyalty still exists." Michael glanced at the girl. Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. "If anyone finds this letter, tell my daughter she was my best decision. Tell her I trusted her heart more than anything. And if you can, help her understand that heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they just keep promises." The room was silent, except for the whisper of wind through the cracked window. Hannah pressed her small hand against the page, as if she could touch her father through the words. Michael folded the letter carefully, his voice barely audible. "He wrote this for you, kid. Not to make you sad, to remind you he believed in you." Hannah nodded slowly. "He always said I was braver than I knew." Michael hesitated, then reached for the flash drive inside the box. "Let's see what else he left behind." He plugged it into his old laptop. The screen flickered, revealing a folder labeled Sanctuary Project. Inside were hundreds of photos, injured service dogs, training notes, and scanned medical records. But there was more. A document titled Proposal K-9 Retirement Shelter Initiative. Michael scrolled through it, stunned. "He was planning this," he whispered. "A sanctuary for retired service dogs, funded by the department. He just never got to finish." Hannah's eyes lit up through the tears. "That's what he wanted me to do. I knew it." The idea settled like sunlight in the dusty room, simple, powerful, full of promise. Michael looked around the cluttered office, at the uniforms, the files, the walls lined with photos of men and dogs standing side by side. "We could finish it for him," he said quietly. "You and me." Hannah blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "You'd help?" He smiled gently. "I told you I don't break promises. Besides, I think this is what I've been waiting for too." Outside, the afternoon light broke through the clouds, washing the room in gold. The dogs stirred, tails wagging softly as if they understood. For the next few hours, they worked together. Hannah organized the documents, reading each page as if memorizing a piece of her father. Michael photographed the proposal and started drafting an email to Chief Reynolds. When evening fell, Mrs. Lowe arrived with a casserole and a thermos of soup. She stood in the doorway, watching the two of them hunched over the desk, light spilling around them. "Looks like you've got yourself a mission," she said warmly. Michael nodded. "We're bringing her father's plan back to life." Mrs. Lowe smiled, eyes glistening. "Then this town might finally remember what hope looks like." Later that night, when the house had quieted and the fire burned low, Hannah sat on the porch steps, wrapped in her father's old jacket. The dogs lay nearby, their breathing steady in the cool air. Michael joined her, handing over a mug of cocoa. "Your dad's dream had a name, the Sanctuary. I think that fits, don't you?" She nodded. "Because it's where they're safe. And maybe where you are too," he added softly. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of the town below. The storm's scars were still there, broken shingles, muddy paths, puddles that reflected the moonlight, but something had changed. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt alive. Michael looked at the girl beside him, at the way she held herself small yet unshakable, like a flicker of light refusing to die out. "You know," he said quietly, "your father didn't just leave you his dogs. He left you his purpose. That's a rare kind of inheritance." Hannah looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "Then I'll make sure it's worth something." The wind brushed through the trees, gentle now, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of clear skies ahead. But down the road, a single pair of headlights appeared again, slow, deliberate, stopping at the edge of the property. Michael's smile faded as he stood, shielding Hannah behind him. The dogs rose too, silent and alert, forming a line at his side. Whoever was in that car hadn't come for the weather or for small talk. And as the engine cut off, leaving only the night's quiet pulse, Michael knew one thing for sure: the past they'd just uncovered was not done with them yet. The headlights cut through the dark like a blade. Michael stood motionless on the porch, hand hovering just above the doorframe, listening to the crunch of tires against wet gravel. The dogs tensed at once, no growls, no barks yet, but their bodies formed a wall between him and the approaching car. The engine stopped. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out, his raincoat slick under the weak beam of the porch light. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then came a familiar voice. "Mike Garrison?" Michael blinked. "Chief Reynolds?" The older man nodded, raising both hands slightly. "Easy now. I didn't come here to arrest anyone." The tension in Michael's shoulders loosened a little. He motioned to the dogs, and they eased back, though their eyes never left the chief. Reynolds walked up the steps, his boots creaking against the old boards. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Kept thinking about that proposal. The K-9 Sanctuary idea. It's been buried in the department's files for years. Monroe pitched it right before—" He hesitated. "Before we lost him." Michael nodded. "We found the files. And his letter." The chief's eyes softened. He always talked about this place like it was sacred ground. Said if anything happened to him, this house would become a haven for the ones left behind. Inside, Hannah appeared at the doorway, wrapped in her father's jacket. "You worked with him?" she asked quietly. Reynolds turned toward her, the lines on his face deepening. "I did. Ben Monroe was the best partner I ever had. Stubborn, brave, too big a heart for his own good. When he died, none of us knew you were still here, kid. That's on me." The girl didn't answer, but the look in her eyes said enough years of silence, of waiting for someone to come who never did. "I'm sorry," Reynolds added, his voice breaking a little. "We should have found you." Michael stepped forward. "You can make it right now. Help us rebuild this place. Finish what he started." The chief sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's why I came. But there's something else you need to know. Something I found when I pulled the old records." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folder, damp from the rain. "Your father's last case wasn't just another rescue mission. He'd uncovered a trafficking ring using retired canine seconds for illegal training operations. He was planning to expose it. That's why he kept his proposal off the books." Michael's brow furrowed. "You're saying his death wasn't just bad luck?" Reynolds looked up, his eyes grave. "I'm saying it might not have been an accident at all. A cold draft swept through the porch, rustling the letter that still sat open on the table inside. Hannah stepped closer, her face pale but calm. Then someone killed him because he was trying to help? The chief hesitated. We never proved it, but the evidence he gathered those files in the lockbox could make some people nervous if they came to light. Michael's jaw tightened. You think whoever was behind it knows we found them? I think, Reynolds said quietly, you're about to have company. As if on cue, a low rumble echoed from the road, not thunder this time, but another engine approaching. The chief turned sharply, eyes narrowing. That's not one of ours. M? The dogs bristled, heads low, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the fence. Michael moved Hannah behind him. Get inside, he murmured. Lock the door. She hesitated, voice trembling. What's happening? He gave her a steady look. Maybe your dad's story isn't over yet. Headlights flared again at the far end of the drive, this time colder, whiter, too deliberate to be lost travelers. The beam swept across the property, catching the wet glint of the fence before cutting off. Silence followed. The chief's hand drifted toward his belt out of habit, but he'd come unarmed. Stay behind me, he murmured. Michael's instincts, long buried from his reporting days, stirred awake. He moved to the edge of the porch, eyes scanning the tree line. The rain had slowed, but fog still clung low to the ground, muffling sound and light. Then a door slammed. 2 figures stepped out, dark silhouettes against the mist. One carried a flashlight, the other something heavier that gleamed metallic when the light passed over it. Hannah's voice broke the stillness. Are they from the police? No, Reynolds said grimly. They're not. The dogs growled low, a warning that vibrated through the boards beneath their feet. Michael could feel their muscles tense, waiting for his cue. The taller man called out, Evening, gentlemen. We're looking for something that belongs to us. Maybe you've seen it a few old files, a memory stick? Michael's stomach tightened. Who are you? Just cleanup crew, the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Your friend Monroe left a mess years ago. We're here to take out the trash. Reynolds stepped forward. You've got 5 seconds to get off this property. The second man laughed softly. Still the tough guy, huh, Chief? Retired or not, you don't scare me. Yeah. The sound of rain dripping from the roof was the only answer. Then the first man flicked his flashlight toward the house, toward Hannah, standing frozen in the doorway. Cute kid, he said. Didn't know he left one behind. Ranger barked once sharp, commanding, and the pack surged forward until Michael raised his hand. They stopped at the edge of the porch, bodies taut, ready. Whatever you think is in those files, Michael said evenly, you're too late. The chief already has them. M. The taller man tilted his head. Is that so? Before anyone could move, the flashlight beam jerked upward, blinding them. A scuffle of boots on wet ground, then the unmistakable sound of a weapon being cocked. Reynolds shouted, Down! The shot split the air, echoing through the valley. Birds erupted from the trees, startled into the gray sky. For a heartbeat, nobody breathed. The bullet struck the porch railing, splintering the old wood inches from Michael's arm. That single sound broke the standoff. The dogs charged, a blur of motion and muscle. One of the intruders stumbled back, tripping over the muddy path. The other cursed and fled toward the truck. Call it off, Reynolds yelled. Hannah, Michael shouted. Inside now. The girl hesitated just long enough to whistle, a sharp note that cut through the chaos. Instantly, the dogs froze mid-lunge and retreated to her side, their discipline shocking even Reynolds. The intruders scrambled into their vehicle, tires spinning as they sped back down the road, mud spraying in every direction. The red glow of taillights vanished into the fog as quickly as they'd appeared. For a moment, the world was still again. Only the ragged breathing of man and dog filled the air. Reynolds turned to Michael. You all right? Yeah. He exhaled, heart pounding. They wanted the files. That confirms that Ben was onto something bigger than anyone knew. End. Hannah stepped onto the porch, eyes wide but dry. They knew about me, she said quietly. Michael crouched beside her, gripping her shoulders. And that's why we'll protect you. You hear me? You're safe now. Reynolds stared out toward the road, jaw clenched. Not yet, she isn't. Those men won't stop. But we can use this go public. Let the truth out before they bury it again. Michael nodded slowly. We'll finish what Ben started. His sanctuary, his fight, all of it. The chief looked at Hannah, then back at the mountains, their peaks ghostly under the moonlight. "He always said this town was worth saving," he murmured. Maybe he was right. The first drops of rain began again, softer now, tapping gently against the porch roof like a weary applause. Hannah knelt beside Ranger and whispered, "It's okay. We're safe." The dog leaned against her, breathing steady, his fur warm beneath her small hands. Michael glanced toward the horizon, where the faintest blush of dawn was beginning to color the sky. "Morning's coming," he said. "We made it through the night." But in his gut, he knew better. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The truth they'd uncovered had only started to surface, and the people who wanted it buried were still out there. He looked down at the letter he still carried in his coat pocket, the words echoing again in his mind. "Heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they just keep promises." He exhaled, steadying himself. "Then we keep this one," he whispered. Behind him, the dog stood guard as the first light of morning spilled across the porch, loyal, silent, unbroken. And somewhere far away, the sound of another engine started up again. Morning settled over Maple Hollow like a prayer. Mist clung to the treetops, soft and forgiving, and the mountains shimmered with the pale gold of a new day. The night's danger felt distant now, not forgotten, but folded into the quiet the way grief folds into memory. Michael stood on the porch, mug in hand, watching the dogs patrol the yard with calm precision. Their movements were slower now, not out of fear but trust. Inside, Hannah's laughter, light and hesitant, drifted through the half-open window as she helped Mrs. Low in the kitchen. It was the first real laugh he'd heard from her. The chief's cruiser was parked under the elm tree, its lights off. Reynolds leaned against the hood, flipping through a worn folder. He looked up when Michael approached. "Got the files you sent me," he said. "You were right. Monroe had everything. Names, dates, bank records. Enough to make a few folks very uncomfortable." Michael exhaled. "Will you go public?" Reynolds nodded slowly. "This town deserves the truth. And so does she." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the morning. Somewhere down the road, church bells began to ring steady, slow, familiar. Inside, Hannah came running out, her hair tied back, her father's jacket still draped around her shoulders. "The chief's here," she called. Reynolds smiled faintly. "Morning, kid. You sleep at all?" "Some," she said, rubbing her eyes. Ranger snored. The chief chuckled. "That sounds about right." Sit still. Michael rested a hand on the porch railing. "We were talking about the sanctuary. We've got your father's plans, the proposal, everything. If we can get some funding, this house could become something real, a place for dogs like his to live out their days." Hannah's eyes lit up, a spark of purpose flickering to life. "You mean his dream?" "Exactly," Reynolds said. "But we'll need help permits, volunteers, maybe a fundraiser." "Mrs." Lowe appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "You let me handle that part," she said. "This town owes that man a debt, and I know a thing or two about getting folks together." Michael smiled. "You do more than that, Bee. You keep this place running." She waved him off. "Nonsense. You just get those dogs ready for their close-up. We'll make this a community thing. Call it the Monroe Sanctuary Dedication." The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. Hannah looked up at the photo of her father hanging in the window. "He'd like that," she whispered. For the rest of the morning, they worked cleaning, repairing, painting. The neighbors who had once whispered now arrived with tools and casseroles. A carpenter offered to fix the roof. A group of high schoolers brought new kennels they'd built in shop class. As the sun climbed higher, laughter replaced fear. The Monroe house, once a symbol of loss, began to breathe again. By early afternoon, even the dogs seemed to sense the change. Bravo and Ranger trotted beside Hannah as she handed out water to the volunteers. One of them, a gray-haired veteran, knelt to pet the dogs. "These boys served, didn't they?" "Yes, sir," Hannah said proudly. "They were my dad's team," the man smiled. "Then they deserve a flag on that fence." He walked back to his truck and returned with a folded American flag, edges worn but clean. Together, they raised it on the old pole by the gate. The wind caught it, unfurling it into the light. Michael stood beside Reynolds, watching as Hannah saluted small, solemn, certain. The chief whispered, "He'd be proud of her." Michael nodded. "He already is." But even as joy filled the air, Michael couldn't shake the sense that something or someone still lingered at the edge of it all, waiting for the story's final page to turn. A week later, the Monroe house was alive again. The townsfolk gathered beneath the bright autumn sun for the dedication ceremony. A new sign stood by the gate, the Monroe K-9 Sanctuary. Chief Reynolds spoke softly to the crowd. Officer Ben Monroe gave his life for duty. His daughter gave us back our faith. Applause rippled across the yard. Hannah stood proudly beside her dogs, wearing her father's jacket. A bronze plaque gleamed near the porch. Storms don't scare brave hearts. Afterward, she sat under the elm tree with Michael, pie in hand. "Dad would have liked this," she said. "He'd be proud," Michael answered. The sun dipped low, bathing the sanctuary in gold. The flag fluttered gently, and the dogs dozed near the steps, content at last. Michael unfolded the worn letter in his pocket. Heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they just keep promises. He smiled toward the mountains. "We kept it, Ben." Hannah looked up at him, her eyes bright. "And now it's our turn to keep it going." The porch light glowed warm against the evening sky. Inside, laughter and the soft bark of loyal dogs filled the house, the music of love, healing, and home. The storm had passed. The legacy lived on. Sometimes, healing begins quietly, not with grand gestures, but with a promise kept, a door reopened, or a frightened child finally smiling again. In Maple Hollow, an old house once filled with silence became a home again, not because of money or miracles, but because someone cared enough to stay. The wind that once carried storms now carries laughter, and the same porch that saw loss now glows each evening with the light of love, loyalty, and second chances. And maybe that's what this story reminds us, that love doesn't need to be perfect to be powerful. Redemption doesn't arrive all at once. It grows slowly, like sunlight through a kitchen window on a quiet Sunday morning. A gentle hand, a patient word, a shared meal, these are the things that rebuild the world. The lesson is simple but timeless. Love and forgiveness can build a new home where grief once lived. Kindness, even the smallest kind, can rewrite a life story. Happiness doesn't come from what we own, but from the hearts we choose to open. Everyone, no matter how lost or broken, deserves a place to belong. It's like the porch light left on for someone coming home late at night, one steady glow in the darkness, reminding us that no one has to walk alone. So tonight, wherever you are, take a moment to think about who your Hannah or Michael might be. Someone who just needs a little patience, a second chance, or a kind word to feel safe again. If this story touched your heart, please comment 1 below. If you think we can make it better, press 0 and tell us how, because every story, like every life, grows brighter when it's shared. And if it made you feel something, even for a moment, may it remind you that family isn't always who we're born with, but who we choose to stand beside when the storms come.